In the winter of 2009, a visual novel was released on the Nintendo DS by the name of 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors. It was written by Kotaro Uchikoshi, and it was developed by Chunsoft. Due to its niche genre, obscure at the time publisher, and the fact that it was an M-rated game for the DS, which is actually a lot more rare than you'd expect, it wasn't an extremely successful game in terms of sales. However, it did receive above average to great scores and even won some awards, typically for its story. Now, why am I talking about a visual novel for the DS? Well, believe it or not, this small cult classic of a game went on to spawn not one, but 2 sequels, Virtue's Last Reward and Zero Time Dilemma. Combined, they make the Zero Escape trilogy. These 3 titles were released in 2009, 2012, and 2016 respectively, and as more was added to the overarching story of Zero Escape, it started to become a lot more complex. What first began as a simple plot about escaping a ship quickly dove into a very deep level of complexity, and started to introduce concepts of psychology, science fiction, mystery, horror, and the topic of this video, quantum theory. For those of you who have never heard of this trilogy before though, here's a quick overview so we're all on the same page. All 3 of these games have a similar setup. A group of 9 individuals are kidnapped and taken to some kind of facility. In the first game was a replica of the Titanic, in the second it was a fallout shelter, and the third it was a secret base in Nevada. In order to escape these locations, all 9 participants need to play a game in order to escape. This part has gotten the series compared to Saw a lot, but in truth there's a lot more to it than that. The games in Zero Escape are more like games of logic in gaming the system. Every participant is also given a bracelet that cannot be taken off until that person escapes. What these bracelets do can differ on a game-by-game basis, but in general they can provide information, be used as authentication, or in some cases even kill players who break the rules. My question today is, how does one incorporate quantum theory into narrative? There are many examples out there, but I believe Zero Escape is one of the better ones around, even outside of its own medium. Despite being a genre as linear as the visual novel, this series structures itself in a way that requires players to drive the narrative themselves, most often by jumping between multiple timelines at once in order to discover clues to advance the story and discover the whole truth. This series got me interested in quantum theory, and I would love to explain why. Now, what is quantum theory? To a lot of people, it's an abstract term for a field of science that most have heard of, though not many understand. You know, like rocket science. The term is used quite a bit in technobabble, actually, but believe it or not, it is a real term with a real definition, and real people who study and write about it, though that definition is very complex. Frankly, it's the kind of thing that's probably easier to explain with examples, so let's do just that. There are 2 major examples I'm going to cover in this video, Schrodinger's cat and the many worlds interpretation. Chances are you've heard at least one of these. Let's start with the easy one. The many worlds interpretation is probably one of the most infamous concepts of quantum theory. It's the idea that there are multiple timelines in life where different actions, big or small, can branch off and have huge effects on reality as a whole. I commonly use politics to explain this, so for as an example, let's take the 2016 presidential election. Now, for better or for worse, we live in a timeline where Donald Trump became the 45th president of the United States. The many worlds interpretation is then the idea that somewhere out there in space-time, there's a timeline where that did not happen, and instead his opponent, Hillary Clinton, became president. Both of these timelines exist in some capacity, it's just that we're in the Trump one. Theoretically, the Clinton timeline is extremely different from the one we live in now. Some current events that we are dealing with today could have been avoided if we were in the Clinton route, and vice versa. The Clinton timeline could be going through some serious problems our quote-unquote real timeline found a way to circumvent. And the one event that split this timeline in a way that will affect us for generations was the election day of 2016. A short 24-hour period is all it took to create a split that affected the world. And sometimes something even shorter can have huge ramifications that alter time forever. A butterfly effect, if you will. And now to get back on topic. The Zero Escape games uses the many worlds interpretation as well as the idea of many timelines in a multitude of different ways. However, unlike in most single games where timelines are more or less just there for replay value, fully exploring the ones in Zero Escape are integral to understanding the story as a whole. This is most prevalent in Virtue's Last Reward, the second game in the series and my personal favorite. In this one, you play as a man named Sigma, a college student who was kidnapped on Christmas morning to participate in the game. However, Sigma is not just a normal college student. Your first run through the game will likely be very run-of-the-mill. You'll wake up in this fallout shelter, meet the other players, complete a room or two, and then play the A-B game for a few rounds, which, by the way, is a stellar example of how the prisoner's dilemma works. However, eventually you will reach your first dead end, on whichever timeline you went down. You might find yourself at some kind of crossroad, or maybe even dead, but eventually your adventure will come to an end. At that point, you'll be asked to go back in time to a previous point in the story, and here's where it gets interesting. There are points in the story where this game will throw you for a loop. Let's take this point in the timeline as an example. So we have this character named Tenmyoji, and at one point you have the choice to either ally with him or betray him. Say you were to choose to trust him and pick ally. You would then be met with this. With this being his response.
Are you serious? Someone's dead, and not just dead, murdered. I got no reason to think that murderer wasn't one of you. Only an idiot trusts someone he's never met when there's a killer on the loose. You think I had a choice?
However, when you eventually go back to that timeline to get all the endings and decide to betray him instead, this is the result. With this being his response.
I got betrayed? Last time? What are you talking about? I can't believe you. I'd never choose betray. I trusted you two, and this is what I got.
I apologize.
He chose to do something completely different this time. This confused me a lot when I first played, not only because for all intents and purposes he should have just picked to betray again, but because Sigma himself also notices this. This one line throws all your expectations out of the window. Is this the game breaking the fourth wall? Was this line perhaps a mistake or some kind of leftover developer note? No. In reality, it's because Sigma has the peculiar ability to jump between timelines and retain some select information. The second this skill is revealed and fully realized to you, it changes everything. The long and elaborate timelines of Virtue's Last Reward suddenly feel less like a bunch of random what-if fantasies and start to feel more like vital paths that must all be traversed to uncover everything. There may only be one true ending to this game. However, the only way to reach it is to fall through dead-end endings and uncover information that can help you get past roadblocks in another. For example, there's this one scenario where this character named Phi obtains the necessary criteria to escape the game.
Right. Well, I've got 9 points now. So sorry, but I'm out of here. Do I really have to explain it? I'm leaving. Through the number 9 door.
You try to convince her to stay, however, but it's too late as she runs off, leaving everyone else trapped in the facility. Game over. However, elsewhere in the timeline, you discover something about Phi. She's actually fairly fluent in Latin, and she tells you a phrase that she has always held close to her heart.
A lapsum semel occasionum non ipse potest Jupiter reprehendere.
It translates to, not even Jupiter can find a lost opportunity, and it's a phrase that's actually used a few times in this series metaphorically. With this phrase in mind, you go back to the first timeline where Phi ditched the entire team. Before she can leave this time, your character utters this phrase during his desperate plea to convince her to stay. This shocks her that you would know such an important foreign expression, and it convinces her to stay with the rest of the team and try to find a way out together.
Well, at least it seems Phi has decided to remain.
You've really changed your mind? Yeah, I'll stick around a little longer.
Dilemmas like this are all throughout the game. There's a point where you're lethally injected and need to know the location of a cure. There's a point where a character runs off to attempt suicide and you need to know where they're planning to go to stop them. The penultimate story lock is the discovery of multiple bombs hidden in the facility, and you need to know not only where they are, but the codes to deactivate all of them to save everyone. And this is all impossible to do in one timeline alone. You know, there are actually some examples of this elsewhere in gaming as well, sometimes in places you wouldn't even expect. For example, The Legend of Zelda. That's right, one of the most successful franchises in all of gaming actually has an example of a split timeline. However, it doesn't have just one split, it actually has two, and both of these split in very different ways. Both of these splits take place within the particular installment titled Ocarina of Time. Many consider this one of the most defining games in the series, actually. You play as a boy named Link who finds a magical sword that can teleport him 7 years into the future, and this can have many effects on the game's world. For example, what might be a bustling town in one time could be destroyed and desolated by the villain in the next. The timeline split in this game, however, takes place during the final confrontation with the big bad of the game, because according to an official source, the timeline splits into 3 at this moment, and they are for very different reasons. The first split is somewhat of a what-if scenario. It's a timeline that takes place if the hero of the game fails to defeat the villain, and as a result, other characters are forced to seal him away by other means. However, not before Lil taking over the world first. The events of this timeline mainly consist of attempts to re-summon the villain time and again. Fun fact, the very first Zelda game actually takes place on this timeline. The second and third split are where it gets a little confusing though. So first things first, in this timeline the hero actually succeeds in defeating the villain, but is then met with a dilemma. Link defeats the villain in the future, and is requested to go back into the past to his original time. This then splits the timeline into what many fans dub the Adult Era and the Child Era. The Adult Era is the time that moves forward after the villain is defeated. The events of the games past this point consist of the villain being revived, and as a result, the gods decide to flood the world in a massive attempt to flush him and his evil minions out, leading to vast terraforming in the land. However, the Child Era is the time that passes after Link is sent back in time. This timeline consists of a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, as well as a few games where one-off villains attempt to reanimate the main villain of the series. Gets confusing fast, doesn't it? Well, thankfully for this series' case, the grand scheme of the timeline actually doesn't have much to do with the overarching series as a whole. You can plot all these games on a timeline, sure, but the games themselves are very contained, and you never need to know the events of one to enjoy another. So that's how the many worlds interpretation works in a nutshell. However, what about Schrödinger's cat? Well, this theory is sort of a poster boy for quantum mechanics. Most people's first exposure to the topic is through learning this concept, so here it is explained. In 1935, an Australian scientist by the name of Erwin Schrödinger conducted quite a peculiar experiment. The experiment was to take a cat, a hammer, a flask of poison, among other things, and place them inside of a seal-proof box, and then he waited an hour. Now, what productive result can you possibly get from this? Well, all of the non-cat items that were placed into the box were actually set up into a contraption. A pretty simple one, really. It's a contraption that, after an hour passes, has an exact 50-50 chance to trigger and kill anything within a short range. This is where the thought experiment surrounding Schrödinger's cat begins. An hour has passed and the cat is still within the box with the lethal trap. You then ask yourself this: is the cat alive or dead? The answer is both. Now, the natural response is, how is that possible? After all, it's impossible for someone to be both alive and dead at the same time, right? Well, the reason why this is possible is because since the cat has yet to be observed as alive or dead, it exists in what is called a superposition, where you just assume both before you actually know. Think of it sort of like one of those grab bags you get at a carnival or a convention. You don't know for certain what's inside there, but you know something has to be in there, and the possibility alone fills your mind with ideas of what exactly could be inside. Those ideas of what might be inside the bag are similar to what might be the condition of the cat. You don't know if he's alive or dead, so you might as well assume both until you know for sure. And what do you know, the cat this time was alright. By the way, if you want another way of looking at it, imagine if the cat being alive or dead were two branches in a many worlds interpretation. The space in between those two timelines would be the superposition, and the second you know the condition of the cat, that's when the correct timeline would snap into motion. And now to tie this back to Zero Escape. Once again, let's go back to Virtue's Last Reward. Can you tell I like this particular installment? A super obvious tie is that the game straight up refers to the theory by name several times. They even find a book detailing Schrodinger's cat, and there's a scene where Phi explains the concept to you in detail. Now, we could leave it off there, but let's go a layer deeper into all of this. There is one particular character in this game who is actually one big metaphor for Schrodinger's cat. His name is K. K, spelled as just the letter K, is a pretty mysterious character right off the bat. He talks very proper and is extremely polite, however walks around in a giant robot suit he cannot take off.
Did you find anything?
Nothing of interest.
You'd better not be hiding something.
There really wasn't anything helpful. At least, nothing that could help us escape. There was a book about a cat, though.
Oh, and he has amnesia as well. Most characters are cautious around him, and a lot of his story is based around finding fragments of his past as well as a way to take off his suit. And it can take quite a while before you find any headway into this. I remember during my first playthrough, his major plot points were some of the last to be wrapped up. They do eventually reveal who K is, though. Now, I'd like to say before I reveal this that I'm going to be as vague as I can here, because this is certainly one game I would never want to spoil for someone. However, I will need to talk about a major reveal in order to fully illustrate this. Just a fair warning. And without further ado, the mysterious man behind the suit is actually two people. Now, I'm not going to say who they are because, again, spoilers, but K's identity is revealed twice in the story, once near the end and one at the very, very end. Both times K is revealed to be one of two people. Now, how is this possible? Well, the idea is mostly that the character of K himself is more or less just the suit. The person inside the suit is the ambiguous part. You never really know who to expect, so you could just assume it was anyone until his eventual big reveal. Now, where have we heard that? When I first pieced this together, this is when it all snapped into place. K is in fact a metaphor for Schrodinger's cat, and here's how. The suit is merely just a seal-proof case. In more ways than one, too, since the suit cannot be taken off. The two people that could be inside of the suit are the two different conditions the cat could be in. If you want to get even more metaphorical, during one of K's reveals, the person in the suit is dead, and the other, they're alive. The many worlds interpretation and Schrodinger's cat may be the two most prevalent quantum mechanics in the series. However, there are several more examples out there. For example, in the first game, a major theme of the story was something called the morphomagenic field, which is when a species as a whole, despite having little contact, is able to learn as a group over time.
Mankind's thought process and actions are all part of a resonant event. All of the resonant events encoded in the fields are projected onto you.
The third game brings up a theory known as mind hacking, which at first just seems like straight up unrealistic mind control, but the idea actually has ties to real-world psychology. There's somewhat of a reference to the Rorschach test, with this abstract painting titled the Funyarimpa.
Apologize to the Funyarimpa!
There are also references to concepts such as lock socks, prosopagnosia, morphic resonance, the studies of Rupert Sheldrake, the list goes on. They even sort of do what I've been doing in this video and use examples from other mediums to explain certain concepts. For example, at one point in this series, characters explain the many worlds interpretation using Back to the Future.
Say you go back in time to when your parents met, using a car as a time machine. Know what movie I'm talking about?
Yeah, of course I do.
Basically what I'm saying is that if any of this interests you and you perhaps want to try the series out yourself, there's still plenty to unpack outside of what I've covered today. And just saying, if you do want to try this series, I'd recommend the PC ports. Footage from these versions is what you've been watching this whole time, and they're pretty good. They've updated the graphical fidelity of all 3 games, adjusted them to play in widescreen, and even added voice acting to the first installment, which originally did not have it due to space limitations. We're getting a bit off topic though. In a nutshell, Zero Escape is an amazing example of how to incorporate concepts of quantum theory into narrative in a way that's interesting, thought-provoking, relevant, and even a bit educational. I love this series if you can't tell. I've shared these games with friends, colleagues, professors, family. Heck, this isn't even the first time I've done a college project on it. It's a trilogy that means a lot to me. It came at a time in my life where I was really looking for something special, and this series delivered. And the main writer behind this series isn't even done either. Very recently during an interview, he revealed a new project his team is working on that for the time being is just being referred to as Project Sync. Whether it will have to do with quantum theory or even be related to Zero Escape at all will likely be revealed in the coming months. But suffice it to say, I will probably be following this amazing team behind this series for a very long time. Thanks for watching. This video essay was created for my college thesis in new media. If you enjoyed this, feel free to let me know in the comments below, or by hitting that like button. If reception of this is well enough, I might consider doing more heavily edited videos like this in the future. This was a lot of fun to make. And if by chance I missed something in the credits or I'm corrected on anything, all revisions will be in the description below, as well as a link to my social media sites if you would like to follow for more. Again, I hope you all enjoyed this, and thanks for watching.